US cycling legend Lance Armstrong maintains his innocence but gives up the fight against doping allegations. Is it time to re-examine the role of performance-enhancing drugs in sport? You're watching Inside Story Americas from Washington. Hello, I'm Shihab Ratansi. He defeated cancer and went on to win 7 Tour de France titles. But Armstrong, who inspired cycling fans and cancer survivors around the world, has been labelled a cheat by the US anti-doping agency. The US ADA says, quote, "It's a heartbreaking example of how the win-at-all-costs culture of sport, if left unchecked, will overtake fair, safe and honest competition." Armstrong, however, says he's never tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs and called the agency's investigation an unconstitutional witch hunt. The sport of cycling has been marred by doping allegations several times in the past. Floyd Landis lost his 2006 Tour de France title to a doping conviction. He's also accused Armstrong, though, of using drugs and of teaching others how to prevent detection. And when asked if he thought Armstrong was a fraud, Landis responded, quote, "If he didn't win the Tour, someone else that was doped would have won the Tour in every single one of those tours." So what is the impact of doping on sport, and how will Armstrong's decision impact his legacy? To discuss this, we're joined by Dave Zirin, sports writer for The Nation magazine. From Philadelphia, we're joined by sports attorney Alan Milstein. He's represented a number of athletes in bioethics disputes. And from New York, we're joined by senior Sports Illustrated writer Grant Wall. First of all, I thought we might hear a little bit more from Lance Armstrong himself. He released a statement on Thursday, and it read in part, "There comes a point in every man's life when he has to say, quote, 'Enough is enough. For me, that time is now. I have been dealing with claims that I cheated and had an unfair advantage in winning my 7 tours since 1999. Over the past 3 years, I have been subjected to a 2-year federal criminal investigation, followed by Travis Tygardt's unconstitutional witch hunt.'" And the statement goes on, Dave Zirin, and there are a lot of allegations there about what's been going on. Let's run through some of the allegations, beginning with that one, that this was an unconstitutional matter. What is he getting at there, then?
Well, I think what Lance Armstrong is getting at is that this has been going on now for years, that Lance Armstrong is somebody who has not even been a part of the sport of cycling in an active sense since 2005. So you're talking about for 7 years he has been defending his name in the face of these charges. He's been paying for lawyers, he's been paying for court costs, he's been going out of his way to try to defend his name in the context of a very, very high profile, high media, 60 Minutes style effort to be able to cast him as a doper. And him stepping away at this point, it's not by coincidence he stepped away right now, because he was about to head towards an arbitration hearing that in the history of cycling has been absolutely brutal to the cyclists themselves. I believe out of 60 arbitration cases that have taken place in the world of cycling, there have been 58 guilty verdicts and 2 not guilty verdicts.
Isn't that more of a sign that in order to get to arbitration, the evidence is pretty strong?
Yeah, that is true as well. But the more point is that he has now found himself in a position where to quit like this at this point was a way, I think, in his mind and in the mind of his foundation, to save face at this particular moment. And given the fact that this has been going on for so many years, given the fact that the due process that has taken place has been going on over so many years, I think that's where he stands on this question of unconstitutionality and it being a witch hunt.
Alan Milstein, as an attorney who has represented sports people in the past, I mean, is that a defense you would use? This is unconstitutional, that there is evidence this has also been one-sided and unfair. He's been singled out unfairly.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also that he doesn't think they really have jurisdiction to strip him of his titles. Right. And the question is, where does the United States Anti-Doping Agency get jurisdiction over the Tour de France titles?
Yeah, we're a bit confused about that too. Can you answer that?
No, I don't think it has jurisdiction over it.
I think Grant Wall, you might have some thoughts on that, I think.
Yeah, according to the World Anti-Doping Agency, the US ADA does have jurisdiction over this. This still may be appealed to the International Court of Arbitration in Sport by the International Cycling Union. We'll have to wait and see if that happens. But according to the rules as they are set up now globally, USADA does have jurisdiction in this case to strip Armstrong of 7 Tour de France titles.
It's almost as ridiculous sounding as the NCAA saying that Joe Paterno's victories over the last 12 years just didn't happen. And he's gone from 1st to 12th in the all-time coaching victories. It's a similar thing that it sounds.
Because that really, I mean, that was absurd because clearly they had won. Whereas if Lance Armstrong theoretically has used performance-enhancing drugs, then there are questions about how he won.
Right, but then you get to the issue, as you said in the intro, about the people who were behind him. Like, who did he cheat? The people who were behind him who've also been found out to have been using.
Right.
And I ran the numbers this morning. Of the top 10 finishers in all 7 of Lance Armstrong's victories, something like close to 80% of them have been found to be dirty at some point over the last however many years. So this is hardly a sport where he's an outlier.
Right, but that's all the more reason then why the USADA is taking a stand, because they have less of a conflict of interest perhaps than the International Cycling Union or the Amaury sporting organization that runs the Tour de France, because they are trying to root out this kind of corruption. Or whatever it's called.
Let's be careful about the word dirty.
Go ahead. Isn't it?
He took this hormone, this natural hormone called EPO, which has the effect of increasing red blood cells in the body. Right? It's not like a steroid. It's a naturally occurring hormone, and as far as I can tell, it's doesn't have the dangerous properties that steroids or what we normally think of as performance-enhancing drugs have on the body.
It's also a banned substance, though.
Well, it's a banned substance. That's right.
I mean, that does
they all use in order to travel 2,100 miles in 21 days. I mean,
that's
what do we expect?
Yeah, no, and I think they're both. I think what you both are saying speaks to, I think, one of the big contradictions in cycling, where yes, it's a banned substance, and at the same time they're performing a feat that I would argue is qualitatively different than any other sport. I mean, on Twitter I called it it's like athletic death pornography. Because you're not supposed to be able to ride a bicycle 35 miles an hour consistently. You're not supposed to be able to go up and down the Pyrenees. It goes 72 miles an hour when you go down the hills. I mean, people watch cycling to see feats that human beings honestly can't do. If you're going to get doping out of cycling, you're going to have a massive reformation in how the sport operates.
But actually, just to talk about the effect of EPO then, which then stimulates red blood cell production, which of course then delivers more oxygen to the muscles. But then what's the effect of that? I mean, are you then overnight turned into Charles Atlas, or is there a lot of work involved with that as well? Does it just immediately, I mean, is it this wonder drug? Or, I mean, what is the actual...
It allows recovery times, it allows for training, much as with steroids, it allows you to train harder. And then to perform better because of that training.
So it's still about working hard. It's not as if you're slacking off by taking this, then.
No. I mean, but with a lot of performance-enhancing drugs, it's all about allowing you to train and recover better so that you can then perform better in competition. But at the same time, it's a banned substance here. I think the big question I have is that why is Armstrong only now deciding not to continue fighting this? This is something that he has been fighting publicly for years and years and years with great energy, and suddenly at the moment of the highest stakes, when he's fully aware of the consequences that will happen by essentially pleading no contest, he goes ahead and does it.
I think that's where
what are the consequences? I mean, from what I understand, he doesn't have to return the prize money, correct?
Well, actually, they have said that they're going to go after the prize money. And as a lawyer, I'm sure that piques some interest, because once again, I don't get their jurisdiction to be able to say this money you won is now ours.
Hang on, the anti-doping agency's taking them.
Yeah, they put out in their statement that they weren't only taking the Tour de France, but they were going to make efforts to get the prize money back as well.
Give it to whom?
All right, we'll move on, because I think there's a lot of questions here, but let's see if we can answer.
The anti-doping agency, maybe? I'm not sure.
We'll see if we can answer the questions that have answers to them right now. On that issue of performance enhancement and EPO and delivering more oxygen, why is that then banned, whereas training at high altitude to increase your hemoglobin and your oxygen supply and so forth, why is that not banned then? Aren't they basically the same sort of thing?
Well, I think so much of this is so capricious. I mean, there was a time where blood doping, the idea of taking your blood out, storing it, and then re-injecting it into your body for the purposes of greater, everything we're talking about, greater oxygenation of the blood, was something that was an accepted and totally smiled upon practice in cycling. A lot of these things about what is or isn't a performance enhancer is very capricious. Tiger Woods has gotten LASIK surgery, for example. I mean, it goes. That's not considered a performance enhancer, even though he had lasers on his eyes to let him hit a golf ball better. It goes back to what Grant was saying, though, which is like this is what they have bargained in terms of what is or isn't illegal. It's what the rule book says is or isn't illegal. Yet when you take a step back from it and ask morally, should this be illegal, I think it gets much more difficult because we tend to smile at athletes who play through pain, who try to recover faster, and who do whatever it takes to win. And yet sometimes these lines are drawn in places that I think for the athletes themselves don't make a lot of sense.
We're going to take a lot of steps backwards in a moment to look at that big picture. But before we do that, a couple more questions about Armstrong's case in particular. He alleges, Grant, that the US ADA has strong-armed riders to testify against him. Is there any evidence of that?
Well, there's more than 10 people who USADA says were going to testify against Armstrong, and I think it's unfortunate from the public perspective that now we're not going to be able to hear that, most likely, their testimony. The big person involved in this, George Hincapie, is a guy who has not testified publicly before. Considered the most loyal fellow rider to Armstrong over the years. Certainly the implication from USADA is that Hincapie was going to testify against Lance Armstrong.
But I've also heard that some riders think that they're going to testify in order to help him, to show that everyone was at it. So therefore it isn't such a crazy thing to
It's certainly,
that's not a great defense.
I would believe that Armstrong is getting out right now, probably under the consult of the advice of his lawyers. I think it would have been a lot of stuff coming out here that would have been very damaging to him publicly. He's made that decision.
Although USADA, as I now know it's called, they seem to have indicated in the last wires I saw that they are going to release the evidence anyway at some point, actually.
If they are, that would be good, I think, for the public's sake. You know, at the same time, I think you have to be tremendously naive to think that anybody associated in high-level cycling over the last 15 years, and probably even farther back, is totally clean, especially people who win races.
Last point on Armstrong's statement then. He also says there's zero physical evidence to support USADA's claims, his heinous and outlandish claims. Is that true, though? Has he never failed a test? Because, again, I've seen conflicting reports about whether he was just under the threshold of illegality or subsequent tests when technology had improved showed that he had been guilty, but there wasn't enough blood really to do another test to ensure that. I mean, what is the truth of this? Grant?
Well, I think you have to note here that other athletes like Marion Jones, like people in the Balco case who confessed, that was not the result of positive tests. Marion Jones never tested positive, just as Lance Armstrong never tested positive.
So he never did test positive at all? I mean, there was no indication in any of the testing then?
In 1999, Armstrong did test positive for, I think it was a steroid, and was able to produce a backdated letter from a doctor showing that he got that medication for saddle sores. There's always been a lot of skepticism about that, but it's not just about did you pass or fail a doping test. Doping tests are just one part of a larger toolbox that are accepted by the World Anti-Doping Agency for guilt.
But this is also one of the most heavily tested sports that exists. And
the tests don't seem to be very good.
That's my whole point, though. And you think about the amount of tax money that actually goes to subsidize these tests. And what does that say about USADA at this point? What does that say about the anti-doping agency that agrees to do this? And I'm not as comfortable as Grant with the idea of them releasing the evidence after the fact as well, and the public's right to know about this. The whole thing about their position in this, first taking the titles, the willingness to release the evidence, even though Lance Armstrong has withdrawn himself, I think it does speak to a kind of performance-enhancing McCarthyism that has overtaken sports at this point, because we exist in this netherworld now. I know you want to talk about that later.
What could
I think we're getting to
what
that
could be
point
the
now,
what could be the evidence? If there's no objective evidence, and I understand that, from what I understand, somebody like Lance Armstrong was tested every day of the Tour de France. So if there was never any objective evidence that he violated any of the rules, the fact that other people are willing to say, well, I saw him do this, or he told me how to do that. I mean, we don't know what those people were offered in exchange for that
Well, actually, again,
testimony.
one of Grant's colleagues at Sports Illustrated had an article today. He posed the question: how much of a jerk would Armstrong have to be for this many people to want to frame him, though?
Yeah, but we don't know what they were offered for their testimony. So, simply releasing the testimony, I don't think, it certainly wouldn't inform me as to what the evidence is against him. If there's no objective evidence against somebody who's been tested so many times,
none of
and every single time.
None of the evidence that the anti-doping agency was going to use was based on new evidence from testing, then, or from his
Right,
sample.
no, not from testing, but
Okay.
from more people willing to come forward and speak out against Lance Armstrong.
Okay, well, let's widen this out then. Clearly, from everything that all of you have been saying, and from much of what I've been reading, it's no secret. I mean, there seems to be, it's an open secret from those particularly close to cycling that doping does go on. Is there a point then, now though, that it's not a new phenomenon, but the drugs are so effective now that it might be affecting the sport then? I mean, you were talking about this culture, this new hysteria that we have right now, perhaps over doping, but is that why?
Well, no, and this is nothing new. But there's this pressure in sports, as there is pressure in American life, to be bigger, stronger, faster. I mean, for goodness sakes, the #1 movie in America right now is The Expendables 2. And there's more steroids in that cast than I bet Barry Bonds used over the course of his entire career. This idea of performance enhancement has become so much a part of American life, whether we're talking about cosmetic surgery, whether we're talking about the fake profits on Wall Street, or whether we're talking about sports. And yet we require a certain purity in sports because we want it to be a refuge to such a great degree. And I think yet at the same time, I think fans are schizophrenic because they also don't want to know how the sausages are made. So they want it to be an escape. But it can't be escape, A, if people are using performance-enhancing drugs, or B, it can't be an escape.
Why not? Why can't it be an escape?
I'm talking about from the perspective of fans. No, I'm talking about from the perspective of fans, from people who call in.
I don't think fans want it that pure. I mean, I really don't. I mean, I think fans want their athletes to be superstars.
Yeah.
Do they accept the suspension of disbelief, though? Do you think they're on some sort of blind faith level? On some level, they are conscious that everything isn't as it seems, but they're prepared to do.
I bet Grant, who's in New York, would agree with me here that if it ever came out that Derek Jeter had used performance-enhancing drugs, it would be an incredible maelstrom in New York City. People would care to a tremendous degree about this whole era of baseball history and Yankee history and even broader New York history.
No, especially because Derek Jeter has cultivated a reputation that, in a sporting sense, is essentially spotless over the years. Now, his teammate Alex Rodriguez was caught with admitting steroid use a couple of years ago, and he didn't have quite the reputation that Jeter did as this kind of moral guidepost. So it's something in sports that it depends who it is who's doing the admitting.
And in Lance Armstrong.
And it depends what sort of actions they've been a part of. Now, Lance Armstrong has made hundreds of millions of dollars through his foundation for cancer research, and I think that's helped him a lot in the public eye. Barry Bonds never did anything like that, and I think has a lot more negative points in the public eye as a result. I'm curious to see now, from a public relations perspective, how this works out, and I think you tend to divide people, fans, into people who are Armstrong people, who are believers no matter what, and then people who think he's dirty. And I don't know if today's news is really going to change all that.
And that does seem to be, it's basically those who are inclined to believe the allegations now say, well, there you go, and those who don't are saying, nah, it's all nonsense. Is that partly because cycling is more of a niche sport, perhaps, than baseball? Or?
Well, cycling is definitely a niche sport to a huge degree. But you know what, unfortunately, is not niche in the United States, and that's having cancer. And I think that's where Lance Armstrong connects in a way that's much more visceral and much more real than any of the constellation of athletes who've been caught up in scandals before. My father-in-law is a cancer survivor. He's got the bracelet. You could tell him that Lance Armstrong kidnapped the Lindbergh baby, and he would still stand by him to the last day. And I think it very much is connected with how he has cultivated this image, and because there's truth behind that image. The foundation really has raised $500 million. But to get to your more key issue here, the main problem in sports is that we do live in this netherworld right now. It's this middle ground between testing that is largely toothless in the major sports because they don't test blood, in any of the major sports, and so you're not going to find out about human growth hormones or anything else. Between that, and it also raises a tremendous danger levels for athletes who take masking agents and things like that. So you've got this netherworld between that and between the idea of what we know for a fact, which is that these performance-enhancing drugs, if taken under the auspices of an actual medical professional, are actually quite safe and do help you heal faster.
All right, so then it's time to look at the pros and cons of actually whether we should just accept the reality, legalize them, regulate these drugs, accept that people are using them, because this is all about winning at any cost. Alan.
Well, let's not broad brush it. I mean, there are different kinds of drugs that are under the rubric of performance-enhancing drugs. There's a difference between steroids that the baseball players may have taken that really increased their strength and their ability to hit home runs, and a drug that is like EPO that doesn't cause any harm, or drugs that athletes take when they get injured and they're prescribed these drugs, or the doctors say it would be a good idea to take this drug.
Right, so then have limited legalization of the ones that aren't, the least harmful rather, and don't perhaps completely distort the sport in question.
Yeah.
Well, when you say completely distort, I mean, we've got football players. We have offensive linemen that weigh 350 pounds, and why do they weigh that much? If you take away the performance-enhancing drugs, are they eating healthily, or are they eating in ways that will surely cause them some health problems when they're 50 and 60 years old?
Right.
I mean, is their diet a performance-enhancing drug, the equivalent of it?
I also think, by the way, I think that Dave is totally right when he says that the American public, in particular the sporting fans, they want to be entertained, and they don't necessarily want to know much about how what you do to your body to be able to provide that entertainment as an athlete. But at the same time, that public, I don't think, wants to know that it can be a total free-for-all and everything is legalized as far as performance-enhancing drugs. I think then it becomes a farce in their eyes, and then you've got a pretty big problem.
Out of interest, though, what is your judgment? Is it currently a total free-for-all? Are all these sports, I mean, everyone scoffs at the World Wrestling Foundation, but actually are all the other sports pretty much the same, frankly?
I think it depends on the sport, probably, on how much you might suspect that people are doping. I still think cycling, for all the efforts it's taken, is in the public eye. Most people would agree is a dirty sport. A lot of people think track and field athletics is still that way. Other ones too. We just saw this week several baseball players get suspended for 50 games for testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs. So certainly there. I
don't know why you're using that word. I really don't know why you're using the word dirty. I mean, really, I think it's an unfair word to use. I mean,
I don't think
if you're talking about
dirty, I'm talking about performance-enhancing drugs.
But Alan Milstein, do you think young athletes still come into sport thinking, I'm going to do this to the best of my ability and win, or are they thinking, I'm going to do everything I can by any means necessary to win?
Well, the athlete just feels like they want to keep up.
I think what's important is
to make up the difference.
Hang on,
if everyone thinks that everyone is doping, then you may have that athlete thinking that, but it's still doping.
Alan Milstein.
Well, I think what's important, at least from a bioethic perspective, is the health of the athlete. Now, is what Lance Armstrong did it injure him in any way? I'm much more concerned about 13-year-old girl gymnasts who are subjected to incredible hours of physical training and what that may do to them. Or again, to offensive linemen who are encouraged to eat all kinds of protein and foods that make them muscular and
how do you
heavy.
make sense of that? I mean, it's nebulous. I mean, it's so difficult to sort of pin down.
I mean, I feel like in any sane society, the professional athletes would be the healthiest people in our society. They're the people who do athletics for a living, and the opposite is the case in the United States. And we've created this bizarre sports world where you're either playing a sport and trying to achieve, and the competition is so intense, you are doing things to your body. Whether they're legal or illegal, you are doing things to your body that will hurt you in the long run on one side, and then you have fans who have issues with obesity because they're just sitting and watching. And I think that you have to look at PEDs within that larger framework, is that it is incredibly cutthroat. The competition is incredibly intense. The salary gap between people who play at the minor league or semi-pro level and the professional level is insanely vast. Where we draw our athletes from in our society has not changed since Joe DiMaggio said 70 years ago, if you don't have hunger in your belly, you'll never make it as a professional athlete. So the stakes are incredibly high for people who want to become professional athletes. And so this is where we're left. It's like if you could take the red pill or the blue pill, and if you take them in some bizarre cocktail combination with a masking agent, it will get you out of the Dominican Republic, out of an inner city neighborhood, off a farm. People are going to do that. Chris Rock said if they found a pill that would make me funnier, I would take it in a second.
Dave Zirin, thank you very much. Grant Wall, thank you. Alan Milstein, thank you very much too. And that's all from the team in Washington, D.C. for now.